we're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bringing news just for you. It's Monday, January 19th here in Seoul. I'm Isujin, and this is News Generation. And joining us today is Grace.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Also, Moonju's with us.
Good morning.
Good morning. And both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So we're at the start of a brand new work week, and as we settle back into what feels like a peaceful daily routine, it's worth remembering that stability isn't something we should ever take for granted. Around the world, many countries are still facing deep uncertainty and turmoil. So we're taking a moment to shine a light on those places. So Grace, to start us off, which countries are currently experiencing conflict and how serious is the situation?
Yeah, well, many countries are at war right now. The conflicts between Russia and Ukraine and Israel and Hamas continue. Civil wars are ongoing in Yemen, Sudan, Nigeria, and other countries. And it's unfortunate to say that the loss of life in these regions is significant.
Right, so we'll get more into that later. So do you have anything to add, Moonju?
Yeah, beyond the ongoing war, geopolitical instability is widening. East Asia faces looming Taiwan risk, while Iran is being rocked by large-scale protests. And meanwhile, tensions are spiking across South America following the recent arrest of Venezuelan president by the U.S. authorities.
Right, so all of this really shows how instability today isn't confined to one region. From East Asia to the Middle East and South America, tensions are spreading in multiple directions at once. So we're going to talk more about this, but first, let's take a look at the screen. While our daily lives may feel calm, that's not the reality everywhere in the world. Across the globe, many nations are currently embroiled in war, civil unrest, or localized conflicts. These crises are reshaping geopolitics and influencing the world we live in, often in ways we don't immediately see. Today on News Generation, we take a closer look at the wars still underway, the civil and regional conflicts unfolding across different parts of the world, how the younger generations are responding to these crises, and what we as individuals can do in the face of global conflict. So as we just saw in the video, conflict is far from a thing of the past, and in many parts of the world, wars are still very much ongoing. So let's start with the big picture. So we kind of talked about this in the intro. So what are some of the major wars that are currently happening, Grace?
Yeah, there's the Israel-Hamas war, which started on October 7th, 2023, with a surprise, large-scale, multi-pronged attack by Hamas and other Palestinian militants from Gaza into Israel, involving rocket barrages and ground incursions that killed approximately 1,200 Israelis and took over 200 hostages. Israel responded by declaring war and launching a massive military offensive in Gaza, aiming to dismantle Hamas and rescue hostages, triggering the intense conflict. The two sides reached a ceasefire agreement last October, but Israel's demand for Hamas disarmament as a condition of the ceasefire has not been met, and both sides are preparing to resume fighting. Israel is considering deploying ground troops to the Gaza Strip, while Hamas is reportedly restoring its network of underground tunnels and seeking external funding to resume paying its fighters.
So that really highlights how fragile even a ceasefire can be and how quickly tensions can spiral back into conflict. And the situation in Gaza in particular shows how unresolved issues can keep a conflict alive. But that's not the only prolonged war the world has been watching. So what about the war in Ukraine? Where does that stand now?
Yeah, there is also Ukraine war, as just you mentioned, launched by Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The conflict will soon mark 4 years this year, with heavy casualties on both sides. Putin's justification for the invasion at the moment were the Ukraine's demilitarization, denazification, and the need to protect Russian residents in Donbas region. While Putin initially described this attack as special military operation, He later declared partial mobilization, which suggested a transition to a full-scale war. Since his time as President-elect, Donald Trump has expressed to help broker an end to the war and has met separately with suggested Presidents Putin and Zelensky. Yet neither a ceasefire nor a peace agreement has been reached, and each side accuses the other of lacking a real will of finding a peace.
So it's quite tragic how long that war has lasted and how enormous the human cost continues to be despite repeated talks about peace. And it really underscores how difficult ending war can be once both sides are so deeply entrenched. But beyond these headline conflicts, other crises often receive less attention. So what are some other civil wars or localized conflicts that are unfolding in other parts of the world, Grace?
Yes, the Yemeni civil war is a complex, multi-sided conflict that began over 10 years ago in late 2014. It's widely characterized as a regional proxy war between forces supported by Saudi Arabia and those supported by Iran. And because of that, resolving this conflict is very complex. And while not yet a civil war, anti-government protests are intensifying nationwide in Iran at a level unprecedented since the Iranian Revolution. And the international impact of this conflict is significant, with the Red Sea sometimes being blocked completely or flights disrupted due to the civil war. And this war has caused one of the world's most severe humanitarian crises, with over 377,000 deaths recorded by 2022. Approximately 4.5 million people remain displaced from their homes, and over 18 million people require humanitarian assistance to survive.
I mean, all this is very tragic. So there are also the ripple effects from disrupted shipping routes to regional issues are really felt beyond the borders. And unfortunately, that list doesn't end there. So Moonji, where else are internal conflicts or geopolitical tensions rising?
Yeah, armed conflict continues within countries such as Nigeria, Sudan, Somalia, and even in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In Northeast Asia, tensions over Taiwan have spiked. China and Japan are trading barbs to each other after Japan's prime minister suggested Tokyo might intervene in a contingency involving Taiwan, and this kind of prompt Chinese displeasure and retaliatory trade measures. In South America, turmoil followed the arrest of Venezuela's president by the U.S. authorities, which rattled the region and was followed by increased pressure on nearby Cuba.
Right, so what really stands out here is how widespread these tensions are. It shows that global instability isn't confined to one region and that today's conflicts are increasingly interconnected. So to learn more, we're going to actually speak with someone who's currently living in a region directly affected by the conflict. So that conversation will take place right after the break, so don't go anywhere.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search out Channel Arirang News. Click Posts and cast your vote in the poll. Make a new type of news with us.
Joining us today is Sasha, Gen Z from Ukraine. Hello, Sasha. Thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Hello, nice to meet you all. Happy to be here.
Good to have you. So can you start us off by describing the current situation in Ukraine?
Yes, of course. So as you previously said, next month in February, it will be exactly 4 years since Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine began. The front line spans around 1,200 kilometers, but cities even over 1,000 kilometers from the front line are greatly affected as well. Of course, it is much more dangerous the closer you're situated to the battlefield. But nowhere in Ukraine is completely safe because drones and missiles from Russia can reach anywhere in Ukraine within a short period of time. Winters are especially harsh due to Russia's bombings of power stations across Ukraine. And so access to power and heating is not stable in multiple regions across Ukraine. In 2022, the Ukrainian armed forces were able to liberate many cities and towns from Russian occupation, but there haven't been huge breakthroughs on the ground for neither Ukrainian defenses nor Russia's advance recently. There has been some progress towards a peace plan in the past year in the works between Ukraine, the US, and European countries as well. However, Ukrainians feel skeptical, and a peaceful resolution in the near future seems a bit far-fetched. And that's the general overview.
Thanks for that explanation, Sasha. Since the war began, then, what has changed the most in daily life for you and the people around you?
I would say a lot of things have changed. I'm currently based in Seoul, so I'm only visiting home for a month at the moment. But hearing sirens that alert the possibility of a missile attack, scheduled power outages have all become the norm. People have to plan their daily life around when there will be power in order to do basic household chores like cooking and using a washing machine. Something that people abroad do not realize is that all of Ukraine has become a no-fly zone since February 2022. So the only way to enter or exit the country is on ground, which is by a car, train, bus, or on foot. I have to take a bus to Hungary or Poland and take a flight from there. So no flights operate in the Ukrainian airspace, which has a huge impact on the Ukrainian economy, things like imports and exports, and the workforce is also declining. And so most regions also have a curfew at night from around 12 a.m. to 5 a.m., where civilians cannot be outside for safety reasons. But despite all this, we try to remain hopeful and live our day-to-day lives.
I see that should be a huge change for you all Ukrainians. Looking ahead, what are you hoping this year personally and also for Ukraine?
So I think all Ukrainians, myself included, have been hoping for the same thing since 2022, which is victory for Ukraine. Maybe 2026 could be the year that it happens. So we just want safety for our loved ones. We want peace that is fair and lasting. Ukrainians are resilient, but too many people are losing their lives, homes, and livelihood. So we don't want the peace to be temporary with another wave of Russian attacks disrupting life in a decade or so. And we don't want the war to carry over to the future generations as well. So especially those of us, such as myself, from my generation, we were born and we grew up during Ukraine's independence. So we experienced many events such as the Orange Revolution in 2004, the Revolution of Dignity in 2013, and also the annexation of Crimea and Eastern Ukraine that was starting in 2013, 2014. So and now in the past few years, it's been the full-scale war. So we know the value of our country's freedom, and so we want to make sure it lasts. And so yes, that's what we are hoping for in the near future.
I mean, I can't imagine what it's like having to take the bus all the way to Hungary and then when you're coming back to Seoul. So I just hope you stay safe, and thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
So we've just heard directly from someone in Ukraine about the current situation on the ground, how daily life has changed since the war began, what she's hoping for in the year ahead. So her story reminds us that these conflicts aren't just distant headlines, but lived realities. So that brings us to our next question. So how are younger generations, Grace, especially Gen Zs and millennials, responding to these kinds of global conflicts these days?
Yeah, well, it seems like millennials and Gen Z are generally active in anti-war movements due to their sensitivity to injustice and open expressions of their opinions. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, protests led by younger generations erupted across the country, resulting in as many as 3,000 arrests. And in the United States, millennials and Gen Z also staged protests, mainly on college campuses, condemning the massacre of Palestinian civilians.
Right, so this really shows how strongly young people respond to what they see as injustice and how willing they are to speak out even when it comes at a personal cost. So from mass arrests to campus protests, their voices are clearly shaping the conversation. And this kind of activism isn't limited to countries directly involved in war. So are you seeing similar movements even in countries that aren't directly tied to these conflicts, Minju?
Yeah, definitely. even those countries without the clear stakes, they are seeing active anti-war movements led by Gen Z calling for peace. South Korea also isn't deeply entangled in the current international, this conflict, but anti-war protests are all still seen, not all, but still seen in Seoul. And many who can't attend kind of shows quite support by sharing posts on social media.
It's interesting how activism today doesn't always mean going out on the streets, whether it's protests, online campaigns, or quiet expressions of solidarity. Younger generations are finding different ways to engage. So this raises a bigger question for all of us. So Grace, with so many conflicts unfolding around the world, so what can we realistically do as individuals?
Yeah, these conflicts are very complicated based on a massive international political mechanism, making them difficult to resolve in a short period of time. Nevertheless, I think it's important for us to continue to pay attention because the impacts of war and conflict have the ability to directly and indirectly impact our lives. For example, while Korea isn't currently engaged in conflict, the reality is that we still are a divided nation. The Korean Peninsula is technically still under an armistice, not a formal peace treaty, since the 1953 Korean War Armistice Agreement, which paused the hostilities but never officially ended the war. Therefore, even though we here in Korea live as though we are not in conflict, the reality is that the two Koreas are in a state of unresolved conflict and military tension, with the DMZ as a heavily fortified border.
I think that's a very important reminder. So even when solutions feel distant, attention itself and awareness also really matters, especially for a country like Korea, which knows all too well what it means to live under an unresolved conflict. So if change feels overwhelming at the global level, perhaps it starts with smaller, more personal actions. So what are some other meaningful ways people can get involved into?
Yeah, as we are all in different, social statuses and positions, I think the ways we can contribute to a peaceful world vary widely. The most important thing here is not to overreach, but just to do what you can in your status and positions. Even small acts of support does matter. Realistically, I think the best we can do as civilians are just keep calling for anti-war and peace. And as Grace just mentioned earlier, that's how Gen Zs and millennials are trying these days right now. And also, while our individual voices might seem minimal, and that's kind of many people I think are thinking that way, but still, if those are added as a group, I think it can exercise as a meaningful effect. And other means you could consider making a small donations to help civilians affected by the war, and it could also mean a lot for them.
So small actions do go a long way. So as we go back to our daily routines, it's worth remembering that peace isn't a given. So behind the headlines are real people living through conflict every day. And while we may feel far removed, staying informed, staying empathetic, and choosing not to look away still really matters. So conflict may feel distant, but its effects are global, and so is our responsibility. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation. But News Gen will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. A big thanks to Grace.
Thanks for having me.
Coming in, also Moonju.
My pleasure.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you have the best day. We are
News Generation.